Imagine discovering your billionaire husband's affair while you're 8 months pregnant. Most women would cry, scream, maybe hire a lawyer. Sarah Mitchell did something far more devastating. While her tech mogul husband was living it up in a $15,000 per night Maldivian villa with his Instagram model Mistress, Sarah was quietly building the most sophisticated revenge plan in corporate history. By the time David Mitchell received those divorce papers via chartered seaplane, it was already too late. His $2.8 billion empire was about to crumble, and the quiet wife he'd underestimated was about to become his worst nightmare. Hit that like button if you're ready for the ultimate betrayal story. Drop a comment with your prediction of how this ends. And don't forget to subscribe, because this revenge masterpiece will leave you speechless. The turquoise waters of the Maldives stretched endlessly beneath the overwater bungalow, but David Mitchell wasn't admiring the view. He was admiring Jessica Reed as she posed against the infinity pool, her phone capturing what would become another viral Instagram post. At 40, David had the kind of wealth that made paradise feel like a casual Tuesday. His tech company, Cloud Tech Solutions, had just closed a $2.8 billion acquisition deal, and he was celebrating the only way he knew how, with someone who wasn't his wife. Jessica, 26 and Instagram famous, adjusted her designer bikini and smiled at the camera. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Young where Sarah was mature, carefree where Sarah was responsible, and most importantly, not 8 months pregnant with his child back in their sterile Manhattan penthouse. "Should I tag the resort?" Jessica asked, her voice carrying that breathless quality that had initially attracted him. "No tags, darling," David replied, mixing himself another drink at the villa's private bar. "We discussed this. Discretion." What Jessica didn't know was that David's definition of discretion had become increasingly flexible over the past 6 months. He'd told his pregnant wife Sarah that he was in Singapore for critical investor meetings. In reality, he was 5,000 miles away, burning through company funds on a woman who cost him $75,000 a month in gifts, travel, and a monthly consulting fee to her shell company, JR Consulting. His phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen with a photo from their wedding day. She looked radiant then, full of hope and trust. David declined the call and silenced his phone. He had no interest in hearing about morning sickness, baby preparations, or any of the domestic concerns that had begun to feel like chains around his ankles. The villa manager appeared at the door, looking unusually nervous. "Mr. Mitchell, sir, there's been a delivery for you. Very urgent," they said. "Arrived by chartered seaplane." David frowned. Nobody knew he was here except his assistant, and she had strict instructions not to disturb him unless the company was literally on fire. He accepted the thick envelope, noting the return address, Sterling and Associates, Sarah's family attorney. "What is it, baby?" Jessica called from the pool. David tore open the envelope, expecting some routine paperwork about their estate planning or maybe documents related to the baby's trust fund. Instead, he found himself staring at papers that made his blood run cold. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Sarah Michelle Mitchell, petitioner, versus David James Mitchell, respondent. The words seemed to blur and sharpen alternately as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. Divorce papers. His quiet, supportive pregnant wife was divorcing him. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached to the divorce petition was an emergency restraining order freezing all of his personal and business assets pending a forensic accounting investigation. His hands shook as he flipped through page after page of allegations. Breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of marital assets, adultery, corporate malfeasance. And there, in stark black and white, were photographs. Him and Jessica in Cabo 3 months ago. kissing on a yacht in the French Riviera, walking hand in hand through the lobby of the Four Seasons in London. The final photograph was the most damning. It showed him and Jessica on this very deck, taken sometime yesterday. The angle suggested it had been shot from a boat offshore with a telephoto lens. Sarah hadn't just discovered his affair, she'd been watching him. David's phone began buzzing incessantly. His business partner Marcus, his attorney, his bank, his assistant. The news was spreading faster than wildfire, but when Sarah's name appeared on his screen again, he answered immediately. "Sarah, what the hell is this?" "Hello, David." Her voice was calm, eerily composed. "I trust you received the papers. This is insane. You can't just freeze everything. The company, our accounts, everything we've built together." "Actually, I can, and I have. You see, David, while you've been playing house in the Maldives, I've been doing some accounting of my own. $75,000 a month to JR Consulting. That's Jessica Reed Consulting. Isn't it quite creative? Using company funds to pay your mistress?" David felt the world tilting beneath his feet. How did I find out the same way I found out about the yacht in Cabo, the hotel in London, and the fact that you're currently standing in a $15,000 a night villa that was paid for with our money? You got sloppy, David. Arrogant. You thought I was too trusting, too focused on our baby to notice. You were wrong. The line went dead. David stared at his phone, then at Jessica, who was now reading the divorce papers with growing horror. "David," she whispered, "my name is in here. They know everything." As the Maldivian sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, David Mitchell realized that his paradise had just become his prison, and the woman he'd underestimated for 7 years of marriage was about to show him exactly how dangerous that mistake could be. While David was discovering the ruins of his carefully constructed life, Sarah Mitchell sat in a conference room 54 floors above downtown Seattle. Her hands rested protectively over her 8-month pregnant belly as she watched the city lights begin to twinkle in the evening twilight. She looked nothing like a woman scorned. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield she was already winning. Across from her sat Elena Vasquez, the most feared divorce attorney on the West Coast. Elena had built her reputation dismantling the lives of powerful men who thought their money made them untouchable. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held the cold precision of a surgeon. "The papers were delivered 47 minutes ago," Elena said, checking her tablet. "The asset freeze was executed simultaneously across 17 financial institutions, his personal accounts, business accounts, credit cards, even his crypto wallets. Everything is locked down." Sarah nodded slowly. She felt no satisfaction, only the grim determination of someone executing a necessary but unpleasant task. "What about the company?" "CloudTech's board of directors will receive a full briefing tomorrow morning. The evidence we've compiled shows clear misuse of corporate funds for personal expenses. Under the fiduciary responsibility clause in his employment contract, they'll have grounds to suspend him immediately." The fiduciary responsibility clause. Sarah almost smiled, remembering how that had come about 7 years ago, when David was pushing for an aggressive prenuptial agreement to protect his fledgling company. Sarah's father had insisted on adding various protective measures. David had been so eager to get the prenup signed, so confident in his own brilliance, that he'd barely read the final version. That clause stated that as CEO and majority shareholder, David had a legal obligation to act in the company's best financial interests. Any personal conduct that endangered the company's reputation or finances would void key sections of the prenup and open his assets to division in divorce proceedings. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her brother Tommy. "Package delivered. He knows." Tommy Chen had been invaluable over the past 6 months. A former Seattle police detective turned private investigator. He'd been the one to uncover the full scope of David's betrayal. It hadn't been hard. David's arrogance had made him careless. The investigation had started when Sarah noticed the recurring payments to JR Consulting while reviewing their quarterly financial statements. A simple corporate search revealed that JR Consulting was owned by Jessica Reed, a 26-year-old influencer whose Instagram showed a lifestyle far beyond what her follower count could support. From there, Tommy had traced credit card receipts, flight records, hotel bookings. David hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been funding an entirely separate life with Jessica, using money that belonged to both him and Sarah, and increasingly, money that belonged to CloudTech's shareholders. "Sarah," Elena said gently, "I have to ask, are you prepared for how ugly this could get? David is going to fight back, and men like him don't fight fair." Sarah turned from the window to face her attorney. "Elena, my father didn't just leave me money. He taught me that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. David has been underestimating me for 7 years. Let's see how that works out for him." Her phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. She let it ring 3 times before declining the call. Then she opened her laptop and began typing. The press release was already drafted, ready to go out to TechCrunch, the Seattle Times, and Forbes simultaneously. The headline read, "CloudTech CEO David Mitchell under investigation for misuse of corporate funds amid personal scandal." The story painted a picture of a brilliant but increasingly reckless executive whose personal indiscretions had put a major tech company at risk. It mentioned the ongoing divorce proceedings and the emergency asset freeze, but positioned Sarah not as a vengeful wife, but as a concerned shareholder taking action to protect the company's future. "The media strategy is crucial," Elena explained. "We control the narrative from day one. David will try to paint you as an hysterical pregnant woman having an emotional breakdown. We're positioning you as the responsible party, acting to protect both your family and the company's thousands of employees." Sarah's laptop chimed with an email from CloudTech's chief financial officer. The subject line read, "Board meeting moved to emergency session tomorrow 8 a.m. Perfect. By morning, David would be facing not just a divorce, but the complete collapse of his professional life. The board members were all experienced executives. They would see the evidence Elena had compiled and reach the obvious conclusion. A CEO who stole company money to fund his extramarital affairs was a liability they couldn't afford. As Sarah prepared to leave the law office, Elena handed her a small device that looked like an ordinary smartphone charger. "What's this? Insurance?" Elena replied. Tommy had it installed in David's home office last month. Every phone call, every video conference, every conversation he's had in that room for the past 30 days is recorded on here. If he tries to destroy evidence or coordinate his defense, we'll know about it. Sarah slipped the device into her purse. She felt a flutter of movement from the baby and placed her hand on her stomach. In 6 weeks, she would give birth to David's child. She intended to make sure that child inherited a legacy built on integrity, not the wreckage of his father's arrogance. The elevator descended 54 floors, carrying Sarah back to street level, but she wasn't descending. She was rising. Rising from the ashes of a marriage built on lies. Rising to claim the power that had always been hers. Rising to protect the future she was literally carrying within her. David thought he was the king of his empire. He was about to learn that queens don't ask for permission to take their thrones. David's hands shook as he tried his banking app for the 5th time. Access denied. Contact your relationship manager. The message felt like a slap across his face. He'd been banking with First Seattle for 15 years. His account typically held over $2 million. Now he couldn't access a penny. "This can't be legal," he muttered, pacing the villa's marble floor. Outside, the Maldivian sunset that had seemed so romantic an hour ago now felt like the end of the world. Jessica sat curled in a corner of the white leather sofa, still clutching the divorce papers. Her perfectly made-up face was streaked with tears, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked her age. Young, scared, out of her depth. "David, what does this mean for me? My name is all over these papers. They have photos of us together. My followers, my sponsors. They're going to see this." David barely heard her. He was frantically calling his attorney, Bill Peterson. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried his business partner, Marcus Stone. Same result. His assistant, voicemail. It was as if the entire professional world had suddenly decided he no longer existed. When his phone finally rang, it was Marcus. "David, where the hell are you?" The phones haven't stopped ringing. Forbes, TechCrunch, The Wall Street Journal. There's a press release from Sarah's attorney saying you're under investigation for embezzlement. "I'm not embezzling anything. I'm the CEO. I built this company from nothing." "Using company funds to pay your girlfriend doesn't look good. David, the board is meeting tomorrow morning. Emergency session. They want answers." David felt ice water in his veins. "Who called the meeting?" "Arthur Westbrook. He's got the other major shareholders on board." "David, they have documentation, bank records, expense reports, travel receipts. How long has this been going on?" "Arthur Westbrook, the 60-year-old venture capitalist who owned 18% of CloudTech. He'd been Sarah's father's business partner for decades, and he'd been the one to introduce David to the old money Seattle crowd that had given him social credibility. Arthur had always been polite but distant with David, as if he could see through the tech genius persona to something less impressive underneath. "Marcus, you have to stop this meeting. Buy me time to get back and explain everything." "Explain what, exactly?" "That you've been lying to your pregnant wife while spending company money on Instagram models." "David, I've been covering for you for months, but this is beyond anything I can fix." The line went dead. David stared at his phone, feeling the familiar surge of rage that had always served him well in business negotiations. But rage required targets, and all his targets were 5,000 miles away. Jessica's phone started buzzing. She glanced at it and let out a small scream. "What now?" David snapped. "Page 6. They have the story. And TMZ. And—" She kept scrolling, her face getting paler with each website. "David, they're calling me a home wrecker, a gold digger. They have pictures of the Cartier bracelet you bought me, the lease on my LA apartment. They know everything." She showed him her Instagram notifications. Hundreds of comments, all vicious. Her follower count was dropping in real time. Brand partnerships that had taken her years to build were evaporating by the minute. David's business phone rang. The caller ID showed CloudTech's main number. His assistant, probably calling with more bad news. He answered anyway. David Mitchell's office. "Mr. Mitchell." It was Rebecca, his assistant, but her voice sounded strange, formal. "This is to inform you that by order of the board of directors, your corporate credit cards have been suspended pending the outcome of the emergency investigation. Security will collect your access badges and company devices when you return to Seattle." "Rebecca, it's me, David. What are you talking about?" "Sir, I've been instructed to refer all communications to the company's legal department. Have a good evening." The line went dead. David stared at the phone in disbelief. Rebecca had worked for him for 3 years, She'd arranged his travel, managed his calendar, even helped coordinate his meetings with Jessica. Now she was talking to him like he was a stranger. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The villa's bill is $14,000 for tonight. Your card was declined. Payment required by checkout tomorrow morning. Jessica looked up from her phone, fresh tears streaming down her face. David, I can't afford to pay for this. My credit cards are maxed out, and with all my sponsorships canceling. David felt a wave of panic unlike anything he'd experienced since the early days of cloud tech, when bankruptcy had seemed imminent every month. But this was worse. Then, he'd been fighting for something. Now, he was watching everything he'd built crumble in real time. He tried calling Sarah again. This time, she answered on the first ring. Hello, David. Sarah, please. We can work this out. Whatever you think you know. I know you transferred $75,000 a month to Jessica Reed's consulting company. I know you used the corporate jet for personal trips with her 8 times in the past 6 months. I know you charged a $40,000 weekend in Dubai to the company's entertainment budget when you were supposedly at a tech conference in Austin. Each fact hit him like a physical blow. The meticulous detail of her knowledge was terrifying. I know about the Cartier bracelet, the lease on her apartment, the Porsche you're buying her for her birthday next month. I know about the secret investment account in the Cayman Islands where you've been moving money you plan to hide in our divorce. Shall I continue? David's mouth went dry. The Cayman account was his nuclear option. Money he'd hidden away in case cloud tech ever failed. Sarah wasn't supposed to know about it. Nobody was supposed to know about it. How? You really want to know your home office isn't as private as you think. Every call you've made, every video conference, every conversation with Marcus about hiding assets and planning to leave me after the baby was born. I have recordings. David, hours of them. The villa felt like it was spinning. David gripped the marble countertop to steady himself. You can't use recordings without my consent. That's illegal. Sarah's laugh was cold and sharp. Actually, Washington is a one-party consent state. And technically, I was the party who consented. The recordings were made in my home, which makes them completely admissible in court. Sarah, please. Think about the baby. Our child deserves to have a father who doesn't steal from his own company to fund his affairs. Goodbye, David. The call ended. David looked around the villa that had seemed like paradise an hour ago. Now it felt like a very expensive prison cell. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in his adult life, David Mitchell had no idea how to escape. The next morning arrived with the brutal efficiency of a Seattle winter storm. David had spent the night staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through increasingly desperate scenarios. Each potential escape route led to a dead end. His assets were frozen. His corporate accounts were locked. Even his personal credit cards had been suspended. Jessica had retreated to the villa's second bedroom after a vicious fight that ended with her screaming that he'd ruined her life. She wasn't wrong. Her Instagram account had lost 30,000 followers overnight. The comments section had become a cesspool of judgment and ridicule. Brands were canceling partnerships faster than she could answer emails. David's phone showed 47 missed calls and 218 unread emails. Most were from journalists wanting his side of the story. A few were from business associates offering lukewarm support that felt more like obituary condolences. At exactly 8 a.m. Seattle time, David called into the Cloud Tech board meeting. He couldn't be there in person, but the company bylaws allowed remote participation in emergency sessions. He expected hostility, but he thought he could still salvage something. He'd built cloud tech from a two-person startup in his garage to a company valued at nearly $3 billion. Surely that counted for something. Arthur Westbrook's voice was arctic when he opened the meeting. David, thank you for joining us remotely. I trust you understand why we've called this emergency session. Arthur, I understand there are concerns about some personal expenses, but I think we're all overreacting. These are minor accounting issues that can be resolved quickly. Minor. The voice belonged to Patricia Hernandez, CloudTech's chief financial officer. David, we've completed a preliminary audit. Over the past 18 months, you've transferred more than $1.3 million in company funds to personal accounts and shell corporations. That's not a minor accounting error. That's systematic embezzlement. David felt the blood drain from his face. 1.3 million. He'd known the number was substantial, but hearing it stated so bluntly made it sound enormous, criminal. Those were legitimate business expenses, entertainment, client development, strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships with Jessica Reed. Arthur's voice could have frozen the Maldivian Ocean. David, we have the receipts. Hotel suites in Paris, charged to the client entertainment budget when no clients were present. Private jet flights to Cabo for, quote, market research, unquote. The Cartier jewelry purchase, coded as executive gifts. Margaret Torres, the board's longest-serving member, spoke next. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd survived 3 economic crashes and countless corporate scandals. David, beyond the financial irregularities, there's the matter of the company's reputation. We're getting calls from major clients asking if their data is secure with a company whose CEO can't be trusted with expense accounts. The PR department is fielding interview requests from 60 Minutes. This has become a crisis that threatens the entire organization. David tried to project confidence, but his voice cracked slightly. I understand your concerns, but let's not make rash decisions. I've led this company through explosive growth. Our valuation has increased 400% under my leadership, which makes your actions even more inexcusable, Arthur replied. David, effective immediately. You are suspended from all executive duties pending the completion of a full forensic audit. The board will appoint an interim CEO within 24 hours. You can't do this to me. I built this company. I am this company. Actually, we can, and we are. The morality clause in your employment contract gives us the authority to suspend any executive whose personal conduct jeopardizes the company's interests. Using corporate funds to finance an extramarital affair definitely qualifies. The call ended with a dial tone that sounded like a death knell. David stared at his phone, trying to process what had just happened. In less than 24 hours, he'd lost his marriage, his company, and his fortune. The empire he'd spent 15 years building had collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. I'm sorry, David. The board offered me the interim CEO position. I have to think about the employees. The shareholders. You understand? David threw his phone across the room. It hit the marble wall and shattered, pieces scattering across the floor like fragments of his former life. Jessica emerged from the bedroom, her face puffy from crying. She'd traded her designer bikinis for an oversized t-shirt that made her look like a college student having a breakdown. The hotel wants payment for tonight, she said quietly. I called my agent. She dropped me. Said I'm too toxic to represent. My mom is flying in from Phoenix. She's going to help me pack up my apartment. Your apartment that I pay for? Paid for, past tense. She sat down across from him, and for a moment, the hostility between them softened into shared misery. David, what are we going to do? Before he could answer, there was another knock at the villa door. David opened it to find the hotel manager. accompanied by 2 Maldivian police officers. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to discuss your account balance. The hotel's policy requires payment for extended stays in advance. Your card has been declined multiple times, and we understand there may be legal issues preventing payment." David felt the last of his dignity evaporate. "How much do we owe for the week's stay, including the seaplane transfer, meals, and beverages? The total is $47,800. Jessica made a small choking sound. David's mind went blank. In his entire adult life, he'd never been in a situation where he couldn't pay a bill. Even in CloudTech's early days, he'd had credit cards, emergency funds, something. Now he was standing in a $47,000 per week resort with empty pockets and a ruined credit rating. "I'll need to make some calls," he said weakly. The hotel manager's expression was professionally sympathetic but firm. "Of course, sir. We can arrange transportation to the airport whenever you're ready to depart. The next commercial flight to Seattle departs tomorrow afternoon." Commercial flight. The words hit David like a slap. He'd flown private for so many years that he'd forgotten what commercial travel felt like. Economy class, security lines, crying babies, and cramped seats. The thought of sitting in coach for 20 hours while tabloid stories about his downfall spread across social media was almost unbearable. After the manager left, David sat in silence, staring at the ocean that had once seemed like paradise. Now it looked like the edge of the world, and he was falling off. His shattered phone buzzed weakly with an incoming text. The screen was cracked, but he could make out Sarah's name and a few words. "Board meeting went well. Interim CEO announced. Flying home tomorrow. We need to talk." David closed his eyes and let the magnitude of his situation wash over him. 24 hours ago, he'd been a billionaire tech mogul celebrating the biggest deal of his career with a beautiful woman in paradise. Now he was a disgraced executive who couldn't pay his hotel bill, abandoned by his business partner, and facing potential criminal charges. The fall from grace was complete. But somehow, David suspected Sarah wasn't finished with him yet. The flight home was a special kind of torture that David wouldn't have believed possible 24 hours earlier. Trapped in seat 32F between a screaming infant and a businessman who recognized him from the news. David endured 22 hours of the worst travel experience of his life. The businessman, initially excited to meet a tech celebrity, quickly turned cold when he Googled David's name and read the headlines. "Aren't you the guy who stole from his own company?" the man had asked loudly enough for half the plane to hear. David pretended to sleep for most of the flight, but sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's calm face delivering devastating news with surgical precision. The recordings, the frozen accounts, the board meeting that had ended his career. Each memory felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. Jessica had taken a different flight to Los Angeles. Their partnership dissolved as quickly as it had begun. Her final words to him had been, "Don't call me, don't text me, don't exist in my life anymore." She'd spoken with the finality of someone cutting off a gangrenous limb. Landing at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport brought fresh humiliation. A small crowd of reporters waited at the gate, having somehow learned his arrival time. Camera flashes exploded in his face as he tried to push through the crowd. "David, is it true you embezzled over $1 million? How do you respond to allegations that you plan to abandon your pregnant wife? Will you be filing for bankruptcy?" David kept his head down and his mouth shut, following the advice of his new criminal defense attorney, Frank Gallows. Frank was a blunt, no-nonsense lawyer who specialized in white-collar crime. His first piece of advice had been simple: "Stop talking. Everything you say from now on will be used against you." The ride to his penthouse in Frank's beat-up Honda Civic was a stark contrast to David's usual chauffeured Bentley. Frank chain-smoked Marlboros and listened to talk radio while David slumped in the passenger seat, watching his city pass by like a foreign country. "Your wife's attorney called while you were in the air," Frank said without preamble. "They want to meet, tomorrow morning, my office." "What do they want?" "To watch you squirm. Probably. But officially, they want to discuss a global settlement. Criminal immunity in exchange for cooperation and asset forfeiture." David's penthouse felt like a museum of someone else's life. Sarah had cleared out her belongings with surgical efficiency. Her closet was empty except for wire hangers. Her office space was vacant. Even her coffee cups were gone from the kitchen cabinet. But she'd left one thing behind. Sitting on David's mahogany desk was a manila envelope with his name written in Sarah's precise handwriting. Inside were printouts of bank statements, expense reports, and travel receipts. Every transaction highlighted in yellow, every lie documented with accountant-level precision. Attached was a handwritten note. "David, I thought you should see the scope of your betrayal laid out in black and white. The total amount stolen from our marriage and your company is $1.7 million over 18 months. The average American family makes $50,000 per year. You spent their entire salary every month on your affair. I hope she was worth it. Sarah." David poured himself 3 fingers of 25-year-old scotch and tried to process the number. 1.7 million. It sounded enormous and impossibly small at the same time. Enormous because it represented actual theft, money taken from shareholders and employees. Small because it was a fraction of his net worth just 3 days ago. His doorbell rang. David opened it to find Tommy Chen, Sarah's brother, holding a cardboard box. "Some things you left at Mom's house," Tommy said, his expression unreadable. "Sarah thought you might want them back." Inside the box were photos from their wedding, a watch Sarah had given him for their 5th anniversary, and a leather journal she'd bought him during their honeymoon in Italy. At the bottom was an ultrasound photo dated 2 weeks ago. Their baby, a boy, healthy and due in 6 weeks. "She doesn't want you at the birth," Tommy said quietly. "Hospital security has your photo. You try to show up. You'll be arrested for trespassing." David stared at the ultrasound image. His son. A child who would grow up knowing his father as a criminal, a cautionary tale, a source of shame. "Tommy, can I ask you something? How long has she known? About Jessica? 6 months. About the money? 4 months. About your plan to divorce her after the baby was born and claim she was mentally unstable? 2 months." David's head snapped up. "What plan I never planned to—" "Cut the shit, David." Tommy's voice was flat, professional, cop voice. "I've got recordings of you and Marcus discussing strategy, how you'd claim postpartum depression made her unfit, how you'd get custody and minimize her settlement, how Jessica was supposed to be your fresh start." The scotch turned to acid in David's stomach. Those conversations had happened, late at night in his office when he thought he was safely alone, planning for contingencies that now seemed like the fantasies of a madman. "Here's what you need to understand," Tommy continued. "Sarah isn't angry. Angry people make mistakes. Sarah is methodical. She's been building a case against you for months, brick by brick. Every phone call recorded, every financial transaction traced, every lie documented. Why are you telling me this? Because she's my sister, and I love her. But she's also carrying my nephew, and I don't want this war to destroy her. So I'm going to give you some advice that might save you both from complete annihilation." Tommy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tomorrow morning, when you meet with her attorney, you're going to sign whatever they put in front of you. You're going to agree to every term, Accept every condition and transfer every asset they demand. Because if you fight this, if you drag it out in court, she will destroy you so completely that your own mother won't recognize what's left. I have rights. I built that company. You stole from that company. The FBI is opening a criminal investigation. The IRS is reviewing your taxes for the past 5 years. The state attorney general is considering charges. Your only hope of avoiding prison is Sarah's mercy. Tommy stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, David, she loved you, really loved you. When she found the first evidence of your affair, she cried for 3 days. Then she got angry. Then she got methodical. You broke the heart of the wrong woman. Alone in his empty penthouse, David sat surrounded by the fragments of his former life. Outside, Seattle sparkled in the evening light, a city full of ambitious people chasing the kind of success he'd once possessed. Inside, the silence was deafening. His phone, cracked but still functional, buzzed with a text from Sarah. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Frank has the address. Come prepared to sign papers. This ends tomorrow, one way or another. David finished his scotch and poured another. Tomorrow, he would sign away everything he'd spent 15 years building. His company, his fortune, his reputation, his future. All because he'd underestimated the quiet woman who'd loved him completely and trusted him absolutely. The irony was devastating. In trying to have it all, he'd lost everything. In reaching for a different life, he'd destroyed the one he'd had. The penalty for his betrayal wasn't just losing Sarah, it was losing himself. Frank Gallo's law office looked exactly like David had expected: fluorescent lighting, coffee-stained carpet, and the faint smell of desperation that seemed to permeate every criminal defense attorney's workspace. At 9 a.m. sharp, David sat across a scarred conference table from Sarah and her legal team. The contrast was devastating. Sarah looked radiant despite being 8 months pregnant. She wore a navy blue maternity dress that somehow made her look both maternal and formidable. Her pregnancy wasn't a weakness, it was armor. Elena Vasquez sat beside her, surrounded by file boxes and tablets, looking like a general who'd already won the war. David's side of the table felt pathetically empty. Just him and Frank, who'd warned him that morning to keep your mouth shut and sign whatever they put in front of you. Thank you all for coming, Elena began, her voice crisp and professional. We're here to resolve this matter quickly and completely. David, we're prepared to offer you a settlement that keeps you out of federal prison. I suggest you listen carefully. She slid a thick document across the table. The title read, Global Settlement Agreement and Criminal Immunity Arrangement. The terms are non-negotiable, Elena continued. First, you will resign from all positions at CloudTech and surrender your stock options. Second, you will transfer all assets acquired during the marriage to Sarah, including the penthouse, the vacation homes, the art collection, and all investment accounts. David scanned the document, his heart sinking with each paragraph. This is everything. You're taking everything. We're taking what was always ours. Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice calm and steady. The company was built with my family's initial investment. The penthouse was purchased with our money. The art collection was funded by our joint assets. I'm not taking anything. David, I'm keeping what belongs to me and our son. Third, Elena continued, you will cooperate fully with the federal investigation into CloudTech's finances. You will testify honestly about your use of corporate funds and provide access to all accounts, including the Cayman Islands holdings you thought were secret. David's face went pale. The Cayman account had been his final escape hatch. $2 million he'd hidden away for exactly this kind of disaster. How did they know about it? Fourth, you will make no public statements about Sarah, the divorce, or the reasons for your resignation. Any violation of this non-disclosure agreement will void your criminal immunity and trigger automatic criminal prosecution. Frank leaned over and whispered urgently in David's ear, "Take the deal. The federal prosecutor has enough evidence to put you away for 10 years. Wire fraud, embezzlement, securities violations. This is your only chance to stay out of prison." "What do I get out of this?" David asked weakly. "Freedom," Elena replied. "You get to walk away without criminal charges. You get to start over somewhere else with whatever money you can earn legitimately. Most importantly, you get to maintain some relationship with your son, assuming you can prove you're worthy of it." Sarah placed a photo on the table. It was a recent ultrasound image showing their baby's face in remarkable detail. "His name is going to be Thomas, after my father. He'll carry the Mitchell name, but he'll be raised to understand that character matters more than money." David stared at the image of his son and felt something break inside his chest. This child would grow up knowing that his father was a criminal, a cautionary tale, a source of shame. The legacy David had imagined building for his family had become a nightmare. "There's one more thing," Sarah said quietly. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I want you to hear something." She pressed play. David's own voice filled the room, recorded crystal clear from his home office. "The prenup is bulletproof. Marcus, Sarah gets the penthouse and a modest allowance, but she'll never touch Cloud Tech. And once Jessica and I are married, I'll have a fresh start with someone who actually understands my ambitions." David felt sick. He remembered that conversation, recorded just 6 weeks ago when he'd thought he was safely alone in his office. "Here's another good one," Sarah said, fast-forwarding to a different section. "Sarah's so focused on the baby that she doesn't pay attention to anything else. I could be stealing millions and she wouldn't notice. Actually, I have been, and she hasn't noticed." His recorded laugh was cruel and dismissive. Sarah stopped the recording and looked directly at David. "I heard every word, David. Every plan you made to destroy me. Every cruel joke at my expense. Every lie you told about loving me while planning to abandon me." The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. David felt exposed, stripped bare of every defense and excuse he'd constructed over the past months. "I have 47 hours of recordings like this," Sarah continued. "Enough to destroy any public sympathy you might hope to generate, enough to prove premeditation in your theft, enough to show that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a deliberate campaign to defraud your wife and your company." Elena slid a pen across the table. "Sign the agreement. David, accept responsibility for your actions and move forward with whatever dignity you have left." David picked up the pen, his hand trembling slightly. With each signature, he was signing away 15 years of work, hundreds of millions of dollars, and any chance of maintaining his former life. But the alternative was federal prison, and he'd seen enough true crime documentaries to know how white-collar criminals fared behind bars. When he finished signing, Sarah stood up slowly, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "David, I want you to understand something. This isn't revenge. This is consequences. For 18 months, you stole from our marriage, our company, and our future. You planned to abandon me when I was most vulnerable. You betrayed every promise you ever made to me." She paused, her voice softening slightly. "But despite everything you've done, I don't hate you. I pity you. You had everything a person could want: a successful company, a loving wife, a child on the way, Financial security beyond most people's dreams. And you threw it all away for what, a 26-year-old who recorded your conversations and sold you out the moment things got difficult. David couldn't meet her eyes. The truth of her words was devastating because it was so complete. I hope you learn something from this. David, I hope you become the kind of man our son can eventually be proud to call his father. But that's going to take years of work. And it starts with you accepting responsibility for the choices that brought you here. Sarah gathered her papers and headed for the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and David Cloudtech's board voted unanimously this morning. I'm the new permanent CEO. The company you built from nothing is going to thrive without you. I thought you should know. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of an era. David sat in the empty conference room, surrounded by the legal documents that had just dismantled his life, and finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. He hadn't just underestimated Sarah, he'd never known her at all. The supervised visitation center in downtown Seattle was designed to be neutral and non-threatening, with cheerful children's artwork on the walls and toys scattered across carpeted play areas. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, carrying 4-month-old Thomas in his car seat and a diaper bag that felt heavier than it should. Thomas was alert and curious, his dark eyes taking in everything around him with the intense focus of someone experiencing the world for the first time. David was already there, sitting in one of the plastic chairs typically reserved for parents waiting for court-ordered visits. He looked different, thinner, older, wearing clothes that were clean but inexpensive. The designer suits and luxury watches were gone, replaced by khakis and a button-down shirt that looked like it came from Target. "Hello, Sarah." His voice was quiet, uncertain. "Thank you for bringing him." Sarah nodded to the court-appointed supervisor, Dr. Patricia Williams. 2 hours, as agreed. I'll be back at 4. She lifted Thomas from his car seat and held him for a moment, breathing in that unique baby smell that had become her favorite scent in the world. Then, with a mixture of reluctance and determination, she handed him to his father. David's hands shook slightly as he took his son. "He's so much bigger than in the photos you sent. He's growing fast. He started sleeping through the night last week, which has been a blessing." "I brought some things," David said, gesturing to a small bag beside his chair. "Books, mostly. Some toys. I wasn't sure what 4-month-olds like. He likes being read to, and he's fascinated by anything that makes noise or has bright colors." 2 hours later, Sarah returned to find David sitting on the floor with Thomas propped against his legs, reading from a picture book about farm animals. The baby was making happy gurgling sounds, reaching toward the colorful illustrations. "How did it go?" Sarah asked Dr. Williams. "Very well." David was attentive and gentle. Thomas seemed comfortable with him. They spent time reading, and David changed his diaper when needed. No issues at all. David looked up from the book, and Sarah was surprised to see tears in his eyes. "He smiled at me," he said softly. "When I was reading about the cow, he actually smiled." Sarah felt her chest tighten. Despite everything David had done, she could see genuine love in his expression as he looked at their son. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. David arrived early for each visit, always prepared with age-appropriate activities and questions about Thomas's development. He learned about feeding schedules and sleep patterns. He practiced diaper changes under Dr. Williams' supervision until he could do them smoothly. Most importantly, he never asked Sarah about herself, her dating life, or whether she'd consider reconciliation. He seemed to understand that his focus needed to be entirely on building a relationship with his son, not trying to rebuild the marriage he destroyed. He's consistent, Dr. Williams reported after the 6th visit. Punctual, prepared, and genuinely engaged with Thomas. The baby is definitely becoming attached to him. He smiles immediately when he sees David now. Sarah had noticed the same thing. Thomas's face would light up when he spotted his father, and he'd reach toward David with the eager anticipation of a child who'd learned to associate someone with positive experiences. "Is he ready for unsupervised visits?" Sarah asked. "I think we could try supervised visits in your home environment soon. See how David handles a less structured setting." The idea of having David in her house felt overwhelming. The home she'd created for herself and Thomas was her sanctuary, the space where she'd rebuilt her life after the divorce. Letting David into that space felt like giving him access to her healing process. But as she watched David reading to Thomas, both of them completely absorbed in the story of a little engine that could, Sarah realized that her son's well-being had to take priority over her own comfort. Thomas deserved to have a relationship with his father. And that meant Sarah would have to continue navigating the complicated emotions of co-parenting with someone who'd betrayed her completely, but who seemed genuinely committed to redemption. "Let's try a home visit next week," she decided. 2 hours, with Dr. Williams present. David looked up from the book, hope and gratitude evident in his expression. "Thank you, Sarah. I know how hard this must be for you." "It's not about me anymore," Sarah replied. "It's about him." 1 year later, Sarah stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of CloudTech's executive conference room, but this time she wasn't alone. Thomas, now 15 months old and walking with the determined wobble of a new toddler, was exploring the child-proofed corner she'd set up for him. The board meeting had just concluded with CloudTech's best quarterly results in company history. "Revenue up 42% year over year," Marcus announced, grinning broadly. "Employee retention at 96%, and we just landed the Morrison Industries contract that David spent 3 years chasing unsuccessfully." Sarah smiled, bouncing Thomas on her hip as he babbled happily and reached for her earrings. "It's almost like ethical leadership is good for business." The room erupted in laughter. The transformation of CloudTech's culture over the past 18 months had been remarkable. Sarah had implemented radical transparency in financial reporting, created an anonymous ethics hotline, and instituted profit sharing that extended to every employee. "How are the unsupervised visits going?" Tommy asked, bouncing his nephew on his knee while reviewing security reports. "Really well. David picks him up every Saturday morning and brings him back Sunday evening. Thomas adores him, and David has become a real father, present, patient, thoughtful. It's like losing everything forced him to figure out who he actually wanted to be." It had taken 6 more months of supervised visits before Sarah felt comfortable allowing David to take Thomas overnight. But the man who showed up every weekend was consistently different from the one she'd divorced. He lived in a modest apartment in Portland, worked as a software consultant for small businesses, and had completed over a year of intensive therapy. Most importantly, he never asked Sarah for anything beyond time with their son. No requests for money, no attempts at reconciliation, no suggestions that they could be a family again. He seemed to understand that his role in her life was limited to co-parenting, and he respected those boundaries completely. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Thomas walked from the couch to the coffee table yesterday. 3 whole steps. I got it on video." As the meeting dispersed, Sarah gathered Thomas's toys and prepared for her afternoon interview with Harvard Business Review. She'd learned to schedule important meetings during his nap time when possible. "Sarah." Marcus lingered behind, his expression serious. "There's a venture capital firm in San Francisco that's offered me a partner position. It's an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving CloudTech." Sarah felt a pang of loss, but tried to keep her expression neutral. What does your gut tell you? That I should take it. I've learned everything I can here, and I think it's time for a new challenge. Marcus, you don't owe Cloud Tech your entire career. We'll miss you terribly, but if this is the right move for your future, you should take it. That evening, as Sarah got Thomas ready for bed, her phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hi," she answered. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I wanted to let you know that I got some news today. The nonprofit I've been volunteering with offered me a full-time position as their director of technology programs. It helps formerly incarcerated people start tech careers." Sarah felt a smile spread across her face. "David, that's wonderful. It sounds perfect for you." "I think it is. I wanted to make sure it wouldn't interfere with my time with Thomas. Though, of course not. I think it's important for him to see his father doing meaningful work. You should take it." "Thank you, Sarah, for everything. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know how grateful I am for the chance to be in Thomas's life." After the call ended, Sarah held Thomas close and reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. 2 years ago, she'd been a betrayed wife facing the collapse of everything she thought she knew about her life. Today, she was the CEO of a thriving company, the mother of a happy toddler, and an example of how someone could transform catastrophe into opportunity. Standing at her living room window, Sarah looked out at the quiet street where she'd built her new life. In 18 months, she'd gone from betrayed wife to successful CEO, from victim to victor. But the real victory wasn't business success or media recognition. It was quiet moments like this, with her sleeping son upstairs, knowing she'd built something solid from wreckage. Elena texted, "Saw the Netflix documentary premiere announcement. So proud. Your father would be amazed by the woman you've become." Sarah remembered her father's advice about being the person everyone underestimated. Real power came from knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, board meetings and toddler tantrums, interviews and bedtime stories. But tonight, Sarah felt completely at peace and optimistic about her future. She'd learned that sometimes the worst thing that happened was also the best, because it forced you to discover who you really were. She'd thought she was just David's wife, a supporting character. Instead, she discovered she was the hero of her own story, capable of building an empire while raising a son, leading with strength and compassion, transforming betrayal into wisdom. 2 years after that devastating day in the Maldives, Sarah stood before 500 women leaders at the Seattle Convention Center, Thomas playing quietly backstage with Tommy. Her keynote speech had just concluded to thunderous applause. "The question isn't whether you'll face betrayal or crisis," she'd told the audience. "The question is whether you'll let it define you or refine you. I chose refinement." Cloud Tech was now valued at $4.2 billion. The Netflix documentary had won 3 Emmy nominations. Harvard Business School taught a case study called The Mitchell Method: Ethical Leadership in Crisis. But Sarah's greatest achievement toddled toward her on unsteady legs, arms outstretched, shouting, "Mama." David arrived for his weekend pickup, carrying Thomas's overnight bag and wearing the quiet confidence of a man who'd found his purpose. His nonprofit had helped over 200 formerly incarcerated individuals launch tech careers. "Ready for our camping trip, buddy?" David asked, lifting Thomas. "He's excited." Sarah smiled. "First time in a tent. I'll send photos." And Sarah, "Thank you for believing I could become someone worthy of his love." Watching them leave together, Sarah felt the profound satisfaction of a job well done, not the corporate success or media recognition, but the harder work of forgiveness, co-parenting, and building something beautiful from broken pieces. That evening, Sarah sat in her garden while Thomas napped, working on her memoir's final chapter. The book would be titled "Underestimated: How Betrayal Taught Me My Own Power." She wrote, "David's betrayal didn't destroy me. It revealed me. Every lie he told, every dollar he stole, every moment he underestimated my intelligence was actually a gift. It forced me to stop playing supporting character in someone else's story and become the hero of my own." The tech billionaire's Maldives betrayal had indeed been the end of Sarah's old life, but it had also been the beginning of her real life, one built on truth, integrity, and the unshakable knowledge that she was far more powerful than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. As the Seattle sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Sarah closed her laptop and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, home, at peace, and finally, completely herself. The woman who'd been served divorce papers in a Maldivian paradise 2 years ago couldn't have imagined this life. But the woman she'd become had built it deliberately, brick by brick, decision by decision, choosing hope over bitterness and growth over revenge. In the end, David's betrayal hadn't destroyed her. It had set her free to become who she was always meant to be.